Hello, writers. This is Jacob Jans with the Writers Workshop at Authors Publish. Thank you for being here. We're just going to wait a minute or two before we get started. So everybody who is going to be arriving here today will have a chance to show up before we start. So thank you again for being here and welcome. If you're here, feel free to say hello in the chat. It's nice to see where everyone is located around the world. Hello in Greece, Lisa. Hello, everybody. If you're here, hello in Mexico. Say hello in the chat. It'll be good to see where you are in the world. I know we have quite an international audience of writers from nearly all corners of the world. So it's always neat to see your names, see where you are. Hello in Portland. I grew up in Portland, Oregon, so it's nice to see that there. Hello in DC and Buffalo and Maine. Hello in Nigeria. I know we know quite a few wonderful writers in Nigeria, actually. So glad that you're able to be here today. So we're just going to wait one more minute before we officially get started. Thank you, everybody, for being here. And let me just pull up my notes. I'm really excited for today's talk. I think it's going to be really valuable and helpful to me personally and to a lot of writers out there. So hello in Veracruz and Atlanta. Okay, so 1 second and then we'll get started. Hello, writers. This is Jacob Jans with the Writers Workshop at Authors Publish. Today, I'm pleased to introduce Ángela Álvarez, who will be giving a talk on how to write layered stories, not stereotypes, so you can make your writing more ethical, empathetic, and unforgettable. Ángela is a Colombian journalist, writer, and podcast host. Her work spans newspapers, classrooms, international media, and more. Through her work and her podcast, When Home is a Foreign Word, she helps people find craft and share stories to build a better world. I'm really grateful to you, Ángela, for being here today, and welcome. How are you?
Thank you. Thank you, Jacob, and thank you, Caitlin. I'm fine. I'm excited to be saying hello from Bogota, Colombia. It's a sunny day for me. That may change because, in Bogota, the weather is as unpredictable as a telenovela plot, but we'll see if it holds out.
Yeah. Well, keep us updated if anything interesting happens.
Okay.
All right. So, yeah, you can go ahead and get started with your presentation. And after your talk, everybody should know we'll be taking questions and we'll answer as many as we can in that time. But for now, I really look forward to hearing your presentation.
Thank you. And thank you for having me. Let me just share over here. And you guys tell me if you're seeing what you should be seeing.
Yeah, it looks good.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you so much again for having me, and hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing the World, Not the Stereotype. I am all fired up, so let's dive in. Welcome to the conversation. I want to thank you all for being here and highlight that this is a conversation. We're going to be talking about stories and how they shape the way we see ourselves and each other and the world. What this isn't going to be is a list of rules. This is not going to be something that you have to follow in order to not get canceled. This is something way better. This is a compass that we're going to build together. It's a way to ask better questions. So your writing doesn't just sound right, it feels right. Because representation isn't just about checking boxes, it's about who gets to appear fully human on the page and on the screen. Let me tell you a little bit about me, although Jacob already introduced me. My name is Ángela Álvarez Vélez, and in English, I write under the name Angela Sierra. And this matters to me because I am someone who has been looking for herself forever in pages and on screens and not always finding much. I've read books and I've seen movies that are supposedly set in my home country, and it's clear that they were written by somebody who has never set foot in this place. Like those movies that show people in Bogota and there's palm trees and everybody's running around in tank tops and shorts and flip-flops. Pro tip, if you're coming to visit, This is a cold city. This is a year-round fall weather city. Bring a jacket, you will freeze. But travel tips aside, blunders like that are why we're here. Because I've seen entire cultures reduced to a flavor, or an aroma, or trauma. So my hope with this talk is that this will be your decoder ring. This is going to be your matrix moment. Because once you start seeing the patterns that we're going to talk about today, you won't be able to unsee them. And hopefully you'll be able to avoid them. So let's get comfortable. Let's get caffeinated, stay hydrated, stay motivated, and let's go. So what does diverse even mean? For some people, the trouble starts here. Many writers that I talk to are tired of walking on eggshells. They feel like they're afraid to say anything or write anything because they feel that no matter what, they're going to get it wrong. And if that's you, I got you. I got you. I want you to know that what we're going to do today, we're going to build together. And before we move into the framework that I want to share, I want to dispel some misconceptions regarding that term diverse characters. They don't exist. You can only have diversity in contrast. That means that you don't have diversity in a solo. You need a choir. You need a pattern. So you don't write diverse characters. You write characters with differences, and that is what builds diversity. Now, what kind of differences am I talking about? All of them, all of them, all the ones that you see here, because diversity is baked into the human experience because everybody is a different mix of all of the traits that you're seeing: race, identity, sexual orientation, disability, economic background. All of those things that you see here make up everyone you know. And we all interact with different people every day. So when we talk about writing for diversity, that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for a story that reflects the multitude of differences that we see in real life. Now, how do we do that? How does that work? Difference includes the infinite range of human perspective, right? Representation is how we reflect those differences on the page, on the screen, on the panel roster, on the guest list, right? And diversity is the pattern we create when we present more than one kind of experience. That's it. So it's not a polka dot pattern if you only have one dot, right? How do we make a pattern? Well, by highlighting differences to achieve representation and create diversity. I'm going to let that sink in. Because what I want you to take from this is that diversity is a group project. And like any group project, your part matters, but it's not the whole thing. You don't have to represent all the differences in every story in order to be contributing to diversity, because not every difference makes sense in every story. What do I mean by that? It makes perfect sense that there are no Latinos in Schindler's List, because Schindler's List is a movie that takes place in 1940s Poland. So having a bunch of Latinos there would not be historically accurate. But it doesn't make any sense for there to be no Latinos in There's Something About Mary, because that movie takes place in Miami, a city that is 70% Latino. And they even had a Cuban American actress, Cameron Diaz, as the titular role, and they still chose to focus the plot on non-Latino characters interacting, on, you know, just the main characters. So that misrepresents Miami as a place and Miami as a culture. So no, you don't need to have a Colombian in the next Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon any more than you need to have a blind fighter pilot in Top Gun 3. But you do need to make room for nuance in your world by creating characters that act and are seen differently from one another, because that's what makes your world, your story world, and actually your real world, feel rich and layered. Now, how do we make that difference make story sense? ask yourself these 3 questions. You can go ahead and screenshot this if you want. You can screenshot anything. Jacob will also be sending you these slides so that you know that you can pay attention, but go ahead and screenshot it if you need to. The 3 questions are, does this character's difference affect how they interpret events? Does it shape how others treat them? Is it present in the emotional core of their arc? And if the answer to any one of those questions is no, well, that's how you end up with characters that feel like they came out of a game of inclusion Mad Libs. So again, the key is to write about people with differences in a way that makes sense in the story world because it reflects a world that's already full of those differences. So a good rule of thumb here is to ask yourself, does my story world feel incomplete without this character? And if the answer is no, there might be something wrong with your story world, or there might be something wrong with that character, or there might be something amiss in the fit between those 2 things. And what you might need to do is save that character for another world or vice versa. Because here's the thing. I want to make it clear that I'm talking about writing for publication specifically. Writing for the joy of it, writing for the creative and aesthetic pursuit is a different topic. But if your aim is to publish a story and make money out of it, then that's not a conversation about creativity and craft. It's a conversation about industry and market. And right now, as you can see from this slide, the market is tired of flatness. The market, your readers, are tired of seeing women used as being overly sexualized and portrayed as too sensitive. They're tired of foreigners who can't speak English just for laughs. They're tired of the sassy Black woman and the Black Latino gang member. And what they want, these overdue portrayals, are the stay-at-home dads, the Black characters in period dramas, the neurodivergent people living normal lives because, gasp, they are normal people. This is what they want. So, and this isn't just in the film industry. This is across all media, including social media. And I'm here to help. So now let me offer you the first of 3 tools that I'm going to share with you today that are going to help you think about all of your characters in a different way. The first tool is called Story Lens. Now, what I want you to think about is that little thing, that little triangle little thing that pops up when you're going to take a picture in your camera. Okay? What does that do? It helps you keep things clear, right? It helps you keep things in focus. That's what this tool does. It helps you look at the story before you write it. You can also use it in revision, but word to the wise, using it before you start can help you save a lot of time and a lot of rewrites. But if you're a pantser, no problem. It'll help you whenever. So let's start. The first element of this tool is writing for, meaning who is the intended audience of your book? Am I explaining things for outsiders? Am I one of those outsiders? How am I framing those on the inside? Am I framing them as exotic, as funny? Am I pretending that the difference doesn't exist or doesn't matter? Now, most of us, I saw in the chat that there's people from all over the world, but most of us might be writing for an English-speaking audience. So most of my examples are going to be based on that premise. But generally speaking, if your imagined reader is outside the culture in your story, then you have to be very careful about writing something that makes the people inside that culture feel stereotyped or othered, especially when the people inside the culture have been historically misrepresented or marginalized. When we write for, we're not just writing for outsiders to understand. We're writing for insiders to feel seen. So if your character's difference exists only to educate readers, or to have your character be pitied or feared or laughed at, but never admired or reckoned with, that is a huge red flag right off the bat. So what does this look like done well? Portrait of a Thief by Grace D. Lee. In this book, a Chinese American woman explores Chinese American identity for an American audience. It's a wonderful action-packed heist story, and it has some really deep discussions about cultural appropriation, museum ethics, and who has the right to own culture. The Man Who Could Move Clouds is a personal favorite by Ingrid Rojas Contreras. It was written by a Colombian woman for an English-speaking, particularly an American audience. This book is about a family's legacy of magic and violence. It's a non-fiction memoir with elements of magical realism, which I find very hard to pull off, but she does. And it touches on my country's history of the narco wars, feminism, racism, and colonialism in a way that is really, really beautiful. Highly recommend. What this looks like done poorly is American Dirt by Janine Cummins. She said that she wrote that book for Americans who don't understand the migrant experience. Spoiler, neither does she. And the film Music by Sia. She wrote that as a love letter to caretakers and to help neurotypical people understand autism. And she did that by grossly misrepresenting autism. So let's move on to the second setting in this tool, which is writing about. Now, this is really great for journalism, for history, for nonfiction, and fiction in secondary POVs because it allows for distance. And distance is a good thing. When you consider writing about someone who is very different from you, ask yourself, who am I writing about and why? Is this character essential to the story, or are they just filling a diversity slot? If they're not part of a pattern, like I said with the polka dots, they're just going to stick out for all the wrong reasons. So again, if the difference is just there to teach somebody a lesson, that's not representation. That's narrative accessorizing, and it's hurtful. So let's be careful with that. Now, when we're writing about, we can write about someone who is completely different from us. You can write about someone who is completely different from you. You just need to be honest that you're doing it from the outside, that you're not part of that community and that you're not part of that lived experience. How did this look done well? The River Has Teeth by Erica Waters was written by a queer woman and has two queer point of view characters. It's a YA fantasy, and it features a Black secondary character. And she's very important, but she's not a POV character. And there are some really intense scenes where that character has conversations with her white friends about how things can turn out really differently for her if they call the police. And it gets acknowledged that she has a fear of the police and that fear is justified. So there's a space to understand that it's not just that she's a little bit darker than anybody else, it's that things can have consequences and stakes for her that are different from the others. And it's done really well. The Valley of Forgetting by Jeannie Aaron Smith is a book written by an American journalist, and she's writing about poor Colombian families. She's very transparent about the fact that she is an outsider, and she treated that with humility instead of entitlement. And she spent years building trust with the Alzheimer's study families, listening and learning and integrating their voices into the book. And she didn't just take the story. She helped the family access resources. She helped them navigate the legal and medical systems. She put some of them up in her spare bedroom, and she helped share their truth and highlight the injustices within medical trials, particularly those that are tested on poor communities. What this looks like done poorly. The Fisher King, The Proposal, Iron Man, Dr. House, A Christmas Carol, City of Joy, and dozens of other movies and books which supposedly revolve around people who are poor or ill or immigrants or displaced, but they're really about people who are just rude and abusive and reckless. And those people get to learn a lesson while the people that they hurt just, get to forgive them and help the protagonist grow. The third dimension of this focus tool is writing as in writing with their voice from their skin about their pain. And you need to ask yourself, am I the best person to carry this voice? Or am I just using it for curiosity or impact? Am I being true to that identity, or am I centering my own experience in a borrowed body? If you're writing a dual timeline or you're writing about a cultural moment that is only accessible through a lived experience, or you're writing a piece of history where nobody from your particular background was present, then it's necessary for the story. But if you're writing an entire book in the first person point of view as someone that is significantly different from you, ask yourself, could I be writing about them instead of writing as them? Because writing as requires proximity. Proximity really matters because when you write, who you write as is a choice that needs to be made for reasons other than vibes. Because speaking as can very easily turn into speaking over. Examples of this done well. Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas is a story written by a trans Latinx author in the point of view of a trans Latino character and highlights how foods and sayings and customs differ from one family to another. And that reflects the unique culture of individual Latin American countries. And it also highlights how all Latin American immigrants kind of face the same struggles and they face them together. But it's very clear that, okay, we're in a Colombian household or we're in a Mexican household or we're in a Venezuelan household because everything is different. And so it's not just one great big Latino grab bag. Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros is written by a disabled author, and it's the point of view of a disabled heroine. It features multiple points of view and it features others with different disabilities. The disabilities impact the choices that they make, but they don't define the characters. And one of my favorite things about this book and about any book that features disabilities, as someone who lives with chronic illness and has chronic illness in my family, I love that the plot does not revolve around trying to find a magical cure for the disability. That's one of my favorite things because when the plot revolves around magically curing somebody, I immediately get ticked off. What this looks done poorly, Dustin Hoffman in Rain Man. That movie became the blueprint for the autistic genius. And in so doing, really erased so many other neurodivergent experiences. And also Ben Affleck in Daredevil. Blind action scenes aside, the blindness was mostly just a stylized gimmick. They really leaned into the disabled but secretly enhanced trope, ignoring the experiences that really blind people face. And, again, if you're not living it, be very careful stepping into it because these portrayals didn't just get it wrong, they actually caused harm. So when can you use this tool? We need all three of these, right? We all need to write for, about, and as someone in our stories, even if it's a third person narrator, because you need a point of view. So use this lens when you're choosing your point of view characters, when you're choosing your audience or marketing category, when you're researching for world building, when you want to catch bias before it's baked in, because whatever you're writing, you need to pick a side, right? This documentary is either about the lion or the gazelle. You can't root for both. You're either rooting for the lion to catch the gazelle so he doesn't starve, or you're rooting for the gazelle to get away so it's not lunch. But you can't root for both. So use this lens when you're going to pick a side, and you want your audience to also pick a side, and you want to do that side justice. Now let's move on to tool number 2. This is called the Narrative Impact Matrix. That is a very fancy name. I hope you are impressed. So first we talked about intention and why we write what we write. Now we're going to talk about impact, what those stories actually do in the world. This next framework helps you evaluate the narrative weight and risk of placing a certain kind of character at the center of your story. We're looking at 3 key factors: misrepresented, meaning characters who've been flattened, stereotyped, mocked, or vilified in media. Underrepresented, which means characters whose stories are rarely centered or told at all. And vulnerable, which are groups who face systemic harm, silencing, or power imbalance in real life. Okay? So when you have one of those 3, only one, you're going to have a green zone. It doesn't matter which of them it has, but you only have one. So those characters are in a green zone where you have a low risk of harm. You can usually write these characters. These characters can usually be written by outsiders with relative safety. As long as you do it with thoughtfulness and nuance, you can usually write for, about, or as these characters. Just, write them well. Here's a list. This is by no means all of the characters in the green zone. These are just the ones that I could think of. And one really great example of this is Anne of Green Gables, who we were just talking about, because Anne of Green Gables is not just a fiery redhead, okay? Her hair isn't something that you use to describe her on page 1 and then you never think about it again. Her hair is a core part of who she is. It affects how she sees herself, how others treat her. It informs how she sees the world, how she interacts. So remember, that's what you want. You want differences that feel organic to the story, not something that feels tacked on for points. So Anne of Green Gables is your north. When you have two factors, again, it doesn't matter which two, it's about having more than one. When you have two factors overlap in this little Venn diagram that I created, it's an orange zone. So this is a proceed with caution. You need lived proximity or deep, thoughtful research for the orange zone, because these characters are often used for plot, but they're rarely offered full humanity. Writing as them requires depth, care, and often collaboration and consultation. Some examples of characters in the orange zone, again, this is not an exhaustive list. These are characters who are at least in two groups, right? So a good example of that would be Black people in leadership roles. And a really great example of that done well is the movie Black Panther, because in that movie we see different kinds of power. We see physical power, political power, economic power, technological power, and we see the ethics of morality of the power in heroes and villains. And we see Black powerful people abusing power and using it for good and being selfish in a way that feels true to that identity. So that's a really good. Gina Torres also did a really great character named called Jessica Pearson in the series Suits, which was filmed in Canada. So I just remembered. That's another one because she's Afro-Latina, but she's not just Afro-Latina. She also, she likes ropa vieja, but she also falls in love. She messes up. She makes mistakes. What we're looking is for full characters who aren't just one thing. Now, the convergence of three of these factors makes it a red zone. These are characters that are stereotyped or flattened, meaning misrepresented. They are rarely given central nuanced roles, so they're underrepresented. And they are subject to real world harm, real world silencing, or structural inequity, meaning that they're vulnerable. Writing for or about these characters requires the utmost care and sensitivity. Writing as these characters without lived experience or proximity increases the risk of harm and should be approached with extreme caution or reconsidered entirely. Examples of red zone characters are all of these: nonverbal autistic people, refugee and asylum seekers, trans women of color. Like these are people who have a lot of overlapping circles. An example of this done well is the character Bill Potts in Doctor Who. If my Whovians out there, I know you're out there. This character was played by actress Pearl Mackie, and that character is a working class Black and openly gay, openly lesbian person, and her identity was woven into the story in a way that was really natural, and not just about representation points. I don't love the arc that character finally had. I'm not going to spoil it for anybody. I do like the ending. I feel like it ended well. I felt like she got a happy ending, but the whole Cyberman salt plot. Anyway, that character is done really well. Now you can use this matrix when you're choosing your narrator, when you're deciding whose trauma is shown, when you're picking whose eyes we see the world through, when you're deciding whose voice gets the last word. That's important. And you can include characters that don't look like you. It's fine. But you can write them with care and distance and respect. Remember, if you're writing as a character who's significantly different from you in your experience, if you're inhabiting their thoughts, their trauma, their voice, then don't just think about permission. Think about power. Because the more marginalized someone is in real life, the more careful you need to be representing their voice in fiction. And I want to pause here again because I want to remind everyone that we're talking about writing for publication, be it traditional or self or hybrid. That's why the question isn't, can I write this? The question is, if I publish this, would I be taking space and resources away from a writer closer to this identity? Because another way to support diversity is to support the writers who are telling their own stories from a place rooted in authenticity and lived experience, and maybe are having a hard time getting published. because the market is saturated by people cosplaying with other identities for spice. And when you support those voices, the industry as a whole wins. So, yeah, sometimes it means you should support or collaborate with another writer instead of writing that story yourself. But remember, no isn't rejection, it's redirection. And it's redirection towards a group project because we're doing it all together. You can support other authors, you can build community, you can support diversity in many ways. And with that in mind, let's look at the last tool. This tool is called the 4 pillars of responsible representation. And this is when you want to, be very clear about what happens next. So we've talked about who you're writing for, about, and as, and we've reflected on the power that you hold. Now, let's explore how to move forward with that awareness together. The first of these pillars is be specific. So specificity is important. Sometimes people say, I don't want to go too deep. I don't want to think about that too much. It's not that big a deal. Or lighten up, it's just a joke. But here's the thing. Details matter because details come from experience and experience shapes identity. So if your world building has room for dragons and vampires and spaceships, but no room for nuance, then maybe your imagination isn't the problem. Maybe you just need to step back and see how what you're writing fits into the broader picture. With that in mind, Latina is not a place. Asia is not a shape. Africa is not a color. So a person described as having a Latin accent, Asian eyes, or African skin is nobody. Make your characters specific, not just Latina, but from Pereira, where her mother was a teacher and she never got the jokes in Sábados Felices. And she hated her quinceañera dress because she wanted it to be blue like her eyes, but her mother said blue was tacky. And yes, my therapist did tell me to let it go, but I'm still salty about it. But I digress. What I'm saying is don't rely only on references to color or race in physical traits to establish identity. Instead, build it into the interactions, the choices, and lifestyle in your characters' lives. Here's how I like to think about it. You should write a character with such depth that you know what that character is doing off camera, so that your reader has an idea of what that person's life looks like when they're not on the page or on the screen. And that, in so doing, you know that you have a character that is a person and not just a list of adjectives. So again, don't be afraid to dig deep because treasure is rarely ever found on the surface. The second pillar is intention. This is all about why. Just because you can write a character doesn't mean you should. So ask yourself, am I including this character because it belongs here? What purpose do they serve in the story? Am I shedding light or stealing thunder? Beware of cultural elements extracted from their context or stories where readers on the outside of the culture think, oh, I get it now, while people on the inside of the culture feel like they're being flattened into scenery and that their heritage is being just used as a cool backdrop for a plot that has nothing to do with their lives. Because that ends up leaving people having, feeling like that story has nothing to do with them, and so they want nothing to do with it. And we don't want that to be your story. Pillar number 3 is consistency. This is about how. Identity isn't the seasoning, it's the broth. And that means that it shows up in the way characters speak, move, hope, and break throughout the whole story, not just when they're introduced. You don't need to name the difference or the identity in every scene, but it should always be felt. I like to tell my students and my clients that identity is like gravity. It's always there. It keeps us grounded. It shapes how we move. It sets limits and it makes things like the Olympics possible because if you think about it, the Olympics are just humans trying to find ways to be creative within gravity. But if you lose gravity, then everything floats and your story loses weight. So it's not just something you sprinkle on to make it interesting. It's woven in who the character is. Now, pillar number 4 is accountability. And I really want to drive this home because accountability is what happens next, right? This means that you need to be in a relationship with the impact of your work, not just with the intent. You're in a relationship with the audience. You're in a relationship with the book. You're in the relationship with the story and with its impact, with its legacy. You will get things wrong. That's okay. That doesn't make you problematic. But refusing to listen does. So be willing to take feedback without getting defensive. Be willing to say, oh, I didn't know that. Be willing to change your mind and do better next time. And ask permission before using someone's story, even if it happened a long time ago, even if you think that person's never going to read that story, especially if it involves trauma or crime or abuse. Say please. Even if you change the names, even if you change the location, say thank you. That's not just about legality, that's about decency because behind every inspiration is a real person, a real family, and real pain. And if you're asking people to share their wounds or researching their pain through the works of others, you owe them care, consideration, and credit. And at the very least, don't vanish the moment the book is done. If you're inspired by somebody's pain, then if you're commodifying the lived experience for profit, again, this is not about writing just for creativity, this is about an industry, then you have a responsibility to give back in some way with time or money or awareness, because speaking up has consequences and so does silence. And again, since we're talking about an industry, this is when a lot of times in a talk, the whataboutisms are going to come up. And people are going to say, or people out there might be thinking, well, what about this book? Or what about that book? And yes, books like the ones you're seeing on this slide and many others exist and have been commercially successful. But we need to acknowledge that they come from a publishing system where there's little diversity among the people, among the voices who control access and visibility. Like I already said, it's not about one book or one author, it's a pattern across an industry. And what does that pattern look like? Well, according to the Pew Research Center, it looks like an overwhelmingly uneven playfield for a lot of people. And the books that we were seeing in the other slide made millions in sales, and they won awards by taking advantage of that unevenness. Stories don't live in a vacuum. They can shape how entire cultures are seen, and the people from those cultures are often ignored when decisions about what to publish and what not to publish get made. So look at the disconnect between what audiences want and what the industry is choosing to publish, and you might start to see this pattern that we're talking about. So let's bring back the diversity definition that we're using today, right? Diversity as a pattern. It's not just about you and your story or this writer. It's about like I said, a whole industry. It's not from banning you from writing certain characters. It's about recognizing that as long as people from marginalized communities remain underrepresented or excluded from publishing, telling their stories for them often means taking up space from them. Sometimes yours is the voice that's needed, and sometimes your presence in a space adds to the imbalance. So this isn't about limiting art. This is about acknowledging that art isn't neutral, and that when art is made public, it becomes part of the culture. So I like to think about this as the fact that these books were published and they were praised and they were profitable, but that doesn't mean they were harmless. Kind of like those radioactive tonics that people drank in the 1920s. They sold really well. They were very popular and they poisoned people. Success doesn't make something good or safe or right. And collectively, we're shifting from success equals validation to impact equals accountability. And we're doing it together, one well-built character at a time. So here's a quick checklist that'll help you spot those blind spots we were talking about earlier. These questions, who gets forgiven and who does the forgiving? These things might seem like really basic, really simple, but again, they indicate a pattern. Whose pain moves the plot and who gets to heal? Like we were talking about with those movies where just people get a free pass at being rude and the others just have to take it and their pain never gets acknowledged. Who gets to fumble and grow and who has to be the bigger person to avoid harm? Whose flaws are framed as quirks and who gets punished for being human? Who gets a backstory and who just gets written off as, oh, that's just how those people are? Who gave me permission to tell the story and did I honor their trust? Who benefits from me telling it? And what do I give back? Because here's the thing. I want you to think about the contrast between Colombian drug lords. I'm Colombian, so of course this is my pet peeve. This is my soapbox, right? I want you to think about the contrast between Colombian drug lords on screen and characters like the ones from Breaking Bad or Weeds. And all these lovable, charming villains. All these that get to be complex anti-heroes, while other people get punished for doing the essentially same thing. So it's like we have The Godfather and Goodfellas on one side, and we have every single Miami Vice episode on the other. Now, my point isn't that we need a Colombian Thomas Crown, although Tomas Corona sounds like a fantastic character, right? International art thief, salsa dancer, and aguardiente sommelier. He only steals from museums that serve bad coffee. Anyway, that's not what I'm saying. My point is that complexity shouldn't be a privilege. If the characters from one group get to be violent and loved, if they get to be flawed and forgiven, then characters from the other group should be treated with the same grace. So let's come back to where we started. You showed up here because you care about telling stories that reflect the world as it is and the world as it could be. So let's take a breath, zoom out, and remember the compass we've been building together. Let's recap. Writing for means asking, who is this for? Who am I centering? Writing about means writing with care and distance, not stereotypes. And writing as means stepping inside someone's lived experience and only doing so with honesty and proximity and purpose. When choosing your main point of view character and secondary characters and building whole human complex beings, choose wisely and mindfully to avoid doing harm. And across all of that, be specific to give your story depth. Be intentional to give your story purpose. Be consistent to give your story weight. And be accountable to give your story integrity. And if you took inspiration from a real life community or purpose that you don't belong to, part of that integrity is showing up after the book is out. That can mean donating part of your proceeds. It can mean raising awareness. It can mean hiring people from that community, buying their books, attending their talks, sharing their platforms, following them on social media, interacting with their content, visiting their towns and tipping generously. It doesn't have to be loud or public or expensive. It just has to be mindful. Okay, so you've used the tools, you've done the things, you've written the story, and now you want to make sure that you did everything right and you want to double check. Maybe you want to consult with what is called a sensitivity reader or an accountability reader. Here, again, you can screenshot this or wait for the slides. Here's some resources that can help you find people who are prepared and committed to doing this work. And also places where you can research best practices and language to communicate with those readers, so you don't have to ask your one Black friend or the sole Dominican coworker at your office. Because being a sensitivity reader is hard, and these people deserve to be compensated for their time, effort, and emotional labor. Please don't ask this as a favor unless you plan to reciprocate in some way. It can be very triggering. I like to, compare this to asking someone with a peanut allergy to bite into a cookie to make sure it doesn't have any peanuts. They can really get hurt. And sometimes reading can do the same. So please bear that in mind. Also, if you're interested in migrant stories or Colombian stories specifically, you can check out my podcast. As Jacob pointed out, I have a podcast called When Home is a Foreign Word, and I specifically talk about immigration and Colombia a lot, but it's mostly about immigration. There's a lot of resources out there. I don't want you to get overwhelmed. Take your time, go through these, go at your own pace, be kind to yourself, but don't lose momentum. Don't stop. Don't give up. We can figure this out together because stories shape the world we live in, and we are here to leave behind a better world with better stories than the ones we inherited. Thank you very, very, very much. Did I do that right? Did I get it?
Thank you so much. What a thought-provoking talk, and also I feel really helpful and motivating. I have so many thoughts in response, but
And I did it in under the allotted time
yeah,
too.
good
I'm so
job.
proud of
You
myself.
presented a lot of information. What was helpful, I think, is each of those tools you presented. I feel like you could just go through them one at a time as you're working through whatever story, and they'll just kind of be one of the like frameworks that you follow to just make sure you're staying on track.
Well,
And
I hope
that's
I
good.
didn't go too fast and people feel like I was, brushing by, but
Well, if anyone is concerned about that, we will be sending the slides
thank
and
you.
the recording, and you can
Yeah.
listen to this again. Um, one of my initial thoughts, among many, is that the further outside of our own lived experience that we're writing, the harder it's going to be. If I'm writing about someone who's just a little bit different than me, I know like what most of the things are, and so I just have a little bit to learn, right? But as I was saying, I've never been to Bogota. I don't know how to say the word quite correctly, even.
You're doing fine.
I know nothing about it. So, like, that would take a lot of work for me to represent it in a way that was helpful to anyone. But, like, my other thought is if I really did that work and really figured out how to honestly and authentically represent your hometown, that would bring us closer together. And that would be particularly meaningful. And it would bring all the readers of that work closer to both of us in a way. And that's what we want with writing.
That's true. But there's a difference between, and in so doing, the thing is the other aspect, which is why I was so clear that this is writing for an industry. Because
Hmm.
part of what makes it exciting to be a writer is that you get to live a life that isn't your own. That's also the
Yeah.
cool thing about reading. It's that you get
Hmm.
to live vicariously through another.
Oh,
And when
yeah.
you're doing that for creative purposes, if you and your friends in your writers group want to take a different identity on every week, and today we're going to write about somebody who lives in Bogota, and tomorrow we're going to write about somebody who lives in Miami, and tomorrow
Hmm.
we're going to, that's cool. But that's creativity. When you
Yeah.
publish that, then we enter the other aspect. And this has happened to me specifically. And
Yeah.
it's that I write as a Colombian woman about Colombian people. And I go to an editor or my agent takes my book to a publishing house and they say, oh, but we already have a story by a Mexican. We already have a story about a Cuban.
Yeah.
And it makes no difference to them. I'm like, but do you understand that we're different? Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They already checked their quote unquote, they already have something to launch on September, which is Hispanic Heritage Month, which we don't have. So I didn't know about that. I don't
Yeah.
know if they have it in Canada. They have it in the United States. And so there's limited room on the shelves, right? There's a limited amount of opportunities given to minority writers. So
Yeah.
if you are a person who could be writing about something else and you're choosing to write about something that only I can write about, then we're going to enter
Hmm.
into competition, right?
Yeah.
And this is true across all industries. We say this about actors. Like, okay, but you can play anything, but Lupita Nyong'o is only ever going to be playing a black character. That's what she can play.
Hmm.
So if there's a role that is written for a black woman and you give it to Scarlett Johansson instead, you're taking a role away from someone, or Viola Davis, or enter your favorite black actress here, or
Yeah.
any other one. Like if you have a Colombian person like Sofia Vergara who has an accent she can't lose, hiring an actress who's going to fake that accent is hurting this person.
Yeah, and I think you see that often. I've seen that in movie adaptations of books where they'll change the color of a character's skin in order to get like the actor they want, and then you're like, why did that happen? And it can often even like change the whole meaning of the story. And
Yep.
that,
If we already
yeah,
have people with that accent, why not just hire that person?
I
I'm
know.
sure they'll be grateful.
Yeah, and there are limited opportunities, as you say.
And there
Uh,
are moments, like I
yeah.
said, you might need to enter, like if you're writing fiction, for instance, if you're writing
Hmm.
historical fiction, and clearly there was nobody with the last name Álvarez in ancient Greece. So I might need to, go there. But there are moments, like I said, it's not an absolute no. It's a be careful.
We have a thought, a question from someone, an anonymous attendee who asks, how can authors advocate for authentic representation when publishing industry professionals might not agree that it's important for the work? Do you
Thank you
have
so much for
thoughts on
that
that?
question. Thank you so much for that question. Well, one of the things that you can do, again, is advocate for your colleagues because we're doing this together. So you can say, okay, I've been invited to a panel, check who else is on that panel, and maybe say, hey, I have a friend who writes, in this genre and is maybe from a different background than me. Could we invite her?
Hmm.
Hey, I'm going to enter whatever con, right? Comic con, romance con, something con. And I know someone who would love it, but maybe it's expensive for them to travel internationally. How about we all pool our resources and help this person come here, or help this person find a hotel, or help this person pay the inscription fee so that they can be a part of this event. Hey, why don't we look at, and this starts in writers groups and readers groups. This starts with your local library, petitioning your library to say, hey, maybe we need more than just the 3 books written by a Colombian that we have every year. I love that you're reading 100 Years of Solitude, but there's more of us. And starting with that, that is something that will tell the publishing industry what you want because they're
Hmm.
chasing what readers want. And today, readers and other writers have more power than we've ever had because now we have access to magnifying our voices through social media in a way
Hmm.
that we didn't 10, 20, 30 years ago. So now they have to listen. Now, when people talk, when other writers say, hey, this panel is looking awfully same, awfully homogenous, why don't
Yeah.
we invite somebody else? That's something you can do.
Hmm. That's very concrete actions that so many of us are involved as writers in conferences and communities where people come together, and that makes sense to support having those communities and represent, the world and not just a slice of it.
And you're doing it now. Thank you
Yeah,
so much for having me and giving me a chance to talk to all the people who are here
yeah,
today that I never would have reached without you.
we put intentional effort at Authors Publish into representing diverse voices. That's something that's important to us. We have an audience of writers from everywhere in the world, and we want to represent like the readers of our publication as much as we can, and not just like one slice.
Mm.
So
Sometimes it's just as simple as asking, hey, why isn't there anybody from Enter This?
yeah.
How about we invite somebody from Enter This?
Mhm. We have a lot of questions. Let me scroll through.
Yay.
Um, so let's, oh, there, so an anonymous attendee says, personally, I like learning history. However, I find that even though I know a lot of history, I cannot actually capture my character's emotions living in a historical era. How would I be able to do that without going through what the characters and real life people in the past did?
That's a really good question because a lot of identity comes from lived experiences because you cannot imagine yourself into somebody's pain because imagination is intellectual and creativity is emotional. So
Mhm.
the thing that I can suggest is finding an emotion close enough to you. So you don't know what it's like to suffer when you're entering a country that is not your own, thinking they're not going to let me in because they don't like the people who look like me. You don't know what it's like to buy a passport coverlet so that you hide the color of your passport. That's something that you can't think your way into. But you can feel your way into fear and into discrimination and into those things. You don't have to push yourself. You don't have to go to like medieval camp. But you can find those points because human beings have basically the same emotions. We all feel the same things. Those feelings are triggered by different external events, but you can connect through the emotion of, I am like this when. And that's a really good exercise. Like if you're trying to understand anybody, not just your characters, but
Hmm.
anyone, you can say to yourself, okay, I don't feel the exact same way that you feel about the exact same thing, but I recognize that feeling. I am like that when.
Hmm.
I hope that helps. I'm all about practical
Yeah.
tools, you guys.
A
I
way
want
to
to help.
a way to build that bridge a little bit.
Hmm.
Yeah. And historical fiction, I think, is an example where you can't go back and like talk to the people that were there,
Often not, yeah.
which is another barrier.
Well, yes and no. I write historical fiction as well,
Yeah.
and that's what books are for. So you read books from the time and you try to
Hmm.
get in touch. I find that rather than reading history books, if you can find works of fiction from that time, that's really helpful because fiction is where emotion is.
Hmm. Yeah. That's a good idea as well.
Read
Um,
the novels, guys.
I think we had a question about sensitivity readers,
Oh
and
dear, okay.
I'm curious, like thinking about this because I've thought about the idea of sensitivity readers a lot, and I know you work as a journalist, and it seems to me
Yeah.
that like the work of like being a journalist of like accurately representing the facts and like really getting to the real story, like there's some overlap there in terms of how you think about these things. Do you have thoughts? Is that like a helpful analogy? Do you have thoughts about that?
Well, I've never used a sensitivity reader because I stay
Yeah.
very, very much within my lane,
Yeah.
intentionally, but because my lane is underrepresented. So
Hmm.
I realize that I have an advantage there because I have it baked in writing about myself. I am writing about an underrepresented minority and misrepresented and vulnerable. So I do think that research can only take you so far, and a sensitivity reader will help with what the prior question was asking about, like historical fiction. How do you get the emotion? Sensitivity readers will give you that. And yes, no one reader represents the entirety of a community, but they can give you really good feedback on how something feels. And that's something that you can't think your way into. That's something that you can't always research. So that's what it's really that's a tool that's handy. Like you talk to somebody who maybe wasn't there, but they were in a similar situation or they heard stories growing up. Like children of the diaspora might not have been in that part of history, but they grew up with the stories. And so those feelings and those emotions are still there, and that's what you want. That's what you want to tap into, what it feels like.
Hmm. It's helpful. We have a question from Sakshi. Sorry if I said your name wrong. What's the best time in the writing process to ask for feedback from the people on whom the characters are based? If asked too soon, they may be susceptible to hurt given the rough draft. Asked too late, the manuscript may need big revisions too far into the writing process.
That's a really good question. And I would say not to um, give you a kind of staple answer, but I think it depends on the person and how much they want to be involved.
Hmm.
Because if you're writing a character based on a person and you've developed a relationship with that person, then you ask them. You
Yeah.
say, would you like when, how long, how often? And then you as a writer obviously have it's your prerogative to see how much of that you integrate. But if you're trying to make a truthful reflection of someone, you ask them. And some people will say, I don't want to know. I
Yeah.
never want to know. I never want to read this. Or some people will say, you know what, show it to me when it's done. Because also, not just because it's a person, but also because feedback too early on any manuscript can demoralize you and derail.
Yeah.
And you're like, what am I even doing? And you spiral into, you feel like you rolled around and lose your sad sauce and you just
Yeah.
don't want to do it. So I would say that it depends, but it's definitely something that you want to bring up early in the conversation with the person as you're researching and studying them.
Yeah. And do you think that like the last tool you talked about, the impact matrix, is that what it was called?
The last two was the four pillars of representation.
Oh no, the second was it the
The
second?
second tool was
Yeah,
the impact
yeah.
matrix.
Like
I like fancy
the
names.
more a person may be impacted by how you tell their story, maybe the more likely they should be looped in sooner.
Again, that depends on the person
That
because
depends.
for some people, it's re-traumatizing, and we need to
Yeah.
respect that. Like
Hmm.
some people can acknowledge the need as someone, I have been in situations, if you're researching the violence in Colombia, if you want to talk about kidnapping, if you want to talk about what it feels like to be when a bomb goes off, if you want to
Yeah.
know what it feels like to almost be kidnapped, you can talk to me. And
Hmm.
I'm not going to want to talk about it a lot. And I'm
Yeah.
probably not going to want to read your book after. I will tell you whatever you want to know, but then don't ask me to do it
Yeah.
again
Hmm.
because it hurts. So those are things that you also want to know because I can acknowledge the importance of getting that story out there and giving people the idea of what it is so they stop romanticizing and fantasizing kidnapping,
Yeah.
but I'm not going to want to talk about it every
Hmm.
day, all day.
Yeah. And maybe
Go
there's
ahead.
someone who wants to talk about it a lot, whatever it may be. Then
That
maybe,
too. And
yeah.
there's people who've written about it and you can
Hmm.
support them. There's
Hmm.
people who have podcasts about it and people who have there are people who are already willing and able to talk about it. Support them.
Yeah.
Invite them on your podcast, interview them, take them out to lunch,
Hmm.
have a coffee,
Yeah.
Colombian
Yeah.
roast.
Oh, I like coffee. Um, we are just about out of time, but I really want to thank you, Angela, for the all the work you did into creating these tools and sharing them, and for sharing them today with us and giving your thoughts about how to write authentically and empathetically. And so, thank you.
Well,
And
thank
is
you.
there anything else you would like to share with the audience today?
I really, really wanted to focus on two things with this talk. First, that diversity is a group project, that we're doing this together, we're building it together. You're not alone. If you feel lost and confused, there are people out there, there are resources out there, and there are a lot of people who feel the same way. Reach out, there's help available. Like we're in it together. We're changing the industry. Like I said, we're doing it together. And I wanted people to feel hopeful and that there's tools that you can wrap your head around and that this is doable
Mhm.
and that I recognize that for a lot of people, a lot of the mistakes aren't malicious. It's just I don't know who to turn to, and hopefully this will help. Like I said, I have a Substack, I have a podcast. I'm easy to find. I'm everywhere.
Yeah.
If you need help, if you need guidance, and the resources page on that, and there's lots of people doing this work, and we're doing it because we care, because we know
Yeah.
the importance of what you said, helping people connect through fiction in a way that is authentic and that does good in the world. And I know that deep down, that's what we all want.
Yeah. Wonderful. What's the name of your podcast again?
Oh, I love the name of my podcast. It's called When Home is a Foreign Word.
Hmm.
I
It,
like
it's
fancy names.
evocative.
When Home is a Foreign Word because it's about that. It's when home is a foreign word. It's about
Yeah.
immigrants.
Hmm. All right.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Yeah. And I'll send a link to it when I send out the recording as well for anyone who wants to check that out. So thank you again. Thank
Thank you
you,
so much.
everybody who was able to watch live and everybody who spent time with us with the recording, however you did so. Thank you. Thank you to everybody behind the scenes at Authors Publish who make these talks possible. Thank you also to all of our supporters who have made Authors Publish lectures possible. And thank you again, Angela, and everybody here today. If you have any thoughts or feedback for me, you can always email support@authorspublish.com. I hope everybody here has a wonderful rest of their day.
Thank you.